Welcome friends. Today we will dive into the world of the mysterious and inexplicable. Scary and frightening ghost videos make us think about the existence of what at first glance seems impossible. Get ready for an unforgettable journey through the dark and mysterious corners of our world, where reality is mixed with mysticism. Immerse yourself in the most ancient legends and modern mysteries that make your heart sink with terror. Get ready for 14 scary and frightening ghost videos that will grab you from the first second. Stay tuned, because now our journey into the world of the otherworldly begins. The last ominous rays of dusk were breaking over the dark branches of the ancient trees when Daniel Wright stepped for the first time into his new home, an old mansion covered with grotesque facades. It seemed that long-forgotten secrets and mystical forces were seeping through its dark walls, crumbling with drops of drizzling rain. From what the real estate agent had said, the place was cheap, like it wasn't even for sale. But when Daniel saw the building, he realized why such blatantly neglected owners were radically willing to part with it. Suddenly, as if blown by a breeze, there was a whiff of fear as he stepped over the threshold of the mansion. The vaguely golden light of burning candles illuminated the curved corridors and dusty salteries. But the most eerie thing was meeting the shadow of a female silhouette in the fog, Jane's sister, Catherine, who had died at the age of 15 only a week before. She appeared before him out of nowhere, her face contorted with death and her eyes burning with the flames of madness. Catherine whispered in a dead voice, enveloping Daniel's eyelids in a cold shroud of terror, "You're not here by accident, brother. You did not choose this house by chance. There is a dark past lurking here that you must uncover." Her words sounded like an ominous prophet of hopelessness that damned him for eternity. Daniel drifted into restless dreams in which he heard whispers of bloody riddles and saw shadows of ancient entities roaming the mansion's narrow corridors. With each passing day, the air was filled with superstitious fears and mysteries enveloping this forsaken house. Daniel realized that Catherine carried with her a message from the netherworld, and that her soul was bound to that house like a landmine waiting to go off. The danger was coming slowly and stealthily, but it was real, like the cold breath of an undertaker. Daniel knew he would have to uncover the secrets of the mansion's past to rid himself of the curse by diligently slamming the coffin boards of a bloody legacy. But for now, the light was quite distant, and only the eyes of a dead man loomed through the gloom, claiming him as a victim of a fate both mysterious and sinister. Daniel Wright found himself in a house filled with mysticism and mystery, where shadowy figures of past and present merged into one sinister canvas. His ghost sister foretold him the inevitability of revealing the terrible secrets lurking within the walls of the mansion. An unknown danger enveloped him, cramping him in its embrace, forcing him to search for answers in the dark history of the place. He realized that only by uncovering the mansion's past could he free himself from the curse that had drawn him into a vortex of mystery and horror. But the road to the truth was littered with traps and sinister entities ready to consume his soul in this sinister maze. A heroine named Allison has just moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. Exploring the attic, she finds an old dusty doll lying behind some forgotten boxes. Intrigued, she decides to make it her treasure. Every night when Allison goes to bed, she hears strange rustling and creaking in the attic. One night, the doll disappears from the room. She begins to realize that something unusual is going on in the house. Late one night, awakened by a noise, Allison sees an eerie childlike figure in a dusty dress standing by her bed. The figure's eyes glow in the darkness, and it begins to walk slowly toward the attic. Not wanting to be alone, Allison decides to follow the figure. Once up in the attic, she discovers a locked room that she has never been told about. In the room she finds an old diary that tells the story of a girl named Evelyn who disappeared years ago in the house. Fearful suspicions begin to take hold of Allison, and she realizes that the figure who is Evelyn's ghost is trying to show her the truth. Reading the diary, Allison learns that Evelyn was locked in an attic room by her father, who was hiding a dark secret from the family's past. She realizes she must uncover this secret to help Evelyn's soul find peace. The contents of the diary bring back the past in surprising detail. Allison realizes that Evelyn's salvation depends on her, and she decides to explore the house further to find the clue. As she delves deeper into her exploration, the house begins to reveal its spooky secrets. Shadows and ghosts begin to follow Allison around the house, trying to stop her. But Allison perseveres with her investigation, uncovering the amazing horrors of the past that are connected to the house. She realizes that righting the wrongs of the past can bring salvation for both Evelyn and herself. Finally, Allison discovers a hidden cave beneath the basement where the family's terrible secrets were kept. In this place, she finds the peculiar conclusion to the whole story, the key to freeing Evelyn's soul. Bravely confronting the horrors of the past, Allison frees Evelyn, bringing peace to the little girl's soul. Evelyn's spirit thanks her and disappears, and the house is finally filled with peace and tranquility. Allison is freed from fears and secrets, but will always remember this amazing adventure and the scary story that was left behind by the doll and the ghost of the little girl from the house on the outskirts of town. On a dark night, when clouds hid the moonlight, a group of friends, Anna, Max, Sophia, and Daniel, went for a walk in an old forest surrounded by mystery and mysticism. Under a stretched starry sky, they accidentally stumbled upon a strange ghostly lantern, which flickered gently, as if inviting them to ancient mysteries and terrifying events. The silently gleaming lantern beckoned the friends deeper into the forest, through thickets of bushes and gloomy trees, as if it were paving the way for them to something sinister that was better left unknown. But curiosity and thirst for adventure compelled them to follow the mysterious light, despite the ominous forebodings that encompassed them. As they progressed deeper into the forest, the air became saturated with the heavy odor of antiquity, their footsteps echoing as if echoing back from eerie corners. Finally, the lantern led them to a circle of old stones, surrounded by silhouetted figures reminiscent of ancient ritual dances. Everything around them seemed static and lifeless, but when Max decided to look at his lantern beam reflected in the foliage, he saw in it the reflection of a grim face that frightened him to the core. Fear gripped each of the friends, but it was too late. They were trapped among ancient ruins where terrible rituals had once been performed. Under the veil of night, the forest began to come alive. The trees whispered vague warnings. The wind carried invisible whispers, as if urging the friends to understand the meaning of what was happening. They realized that they were trapped by forces that had awakened from a long sleep and demanded retribution for their lost power. An old legend told of gruesome events that had taken place in this very staircase centuries ago, of sacrifices and rituals created to summon evil spirits. And now, the friends found themselves at the center of this mystical drama, unwittingly becoming part of the dark mystery hanging in the air. A gust of wind blew the vile odor of graves and blood, and the friends' senses were scarred with fear and anxiety. They realized that to escape from this nightmare they had to find the key to the mystery hidden somewhere in these dark forests. Braving their fate, the friends decided to explore the ruins and solve the riddles guarded by sinister spirits. They discovered a sacred altar upholstered with symbols and ancient writings, which became for them the key to understanding what was happening. Suddenly, the lantern stopped flashing, the mysterious glow went out, shrouding the forest in darkness. But in that darkness, the friends saw new silhouettes that seemed to be friends from the past, dark figures, revived from ancient rituals, seeking to return to the world of the living through them. The fate of the group of friends hung in the balance. Either they could unravel the mysteries of this place and free themselves, or fall victim to the dark history imprisoned in the magical forests. Their decision was quickly made. They applied the knowledge they discovered on the altar and unraveled the ancient code, summoning a power that could end the curse forever. Light broke through the gloom, dispelling the darkness and evil that enveloped the forest. The lantern went out, and the figures vanished into the air, carrying the scent of fresh leaves and freedom. The friends escaped the trap, realizing that the mystical forces of the unknown world are all around us and the mysterious forests conceal much more than meets the eye. Their adventure left a mark on them, a mark of antiquity and magic, reminding them that the reality of our world extends far beyond what we see with our eyes. And they realized that sometimes exploring the unknown requires not only courage, but also wisdom, lest they get lost in the darkness that holds its secrets and mysteries. A teenager named Max lived in a small town surrounded by a mysterious forest. Every morning when he woke up, he found that some strange vague figure appeared in the pictures he had taken the day before. At first he left this attention alone, but with each new day the figure grew closer and closer to him in the photographs. Max felt an uneasy presence around him more and more often, even when he was alone. He began to lose sleep, constantly remembering the ominous images from the photographs, where the vague figure was getting closer and closer to him. He experienced incomprehensible feelings of fear and paranoia. Gradually, Max began to notice that this vague figure began to appear not only in his photographs, but also in real life. He could see her out of the corner of his eye. She flashed outside his window. Sometimes it seemed like he could hear her rustling around the house. Every time he turned around to try to see her better, she disappeared as if melting into thin air. Max began to lose his mind, not understanding what was happening. He tried to find an explanation for these strange phenomena, turning to the locals and scouring the internet for answers, but found nothing. Every day the vague figure came closer and closer, making him shiver with fear. One day Max decided to find out the whole truth and went to the forest, where, according to his guesses, hid the origin of this entity. As he made his way through the thickets and shadows, he felt that he was not alone in this forest, that someone or something was watching him. His heart pounded as he heard rustling behind him, but when he turned around, he saw no one. And then, in the depths of the forest, he saw a shadow that resembled the same vague figure from the photographs. It stood before him, radiating an alien energy, making Max shiver with terror. But he couldn't tear his gaze away, as if consumed by that ominous presence. The creature began to approach, its shadowy outline pale, and Max realized that he was witnessing mysterious forces beyond his comprehension. Each step of this figure was accompanied by a chilling coldness, as if the breath of death was touching his skin. Panic seized Max, and he shrieked, trying to escape, but all attempts were in vain. The creature came closer and closer to him, its chilling gaze piercing his soul. Max realized that his own despair and fear had created this horrible caricature of death that was now before him. But suddenly, when the shadow was only a couple of steps away from him, it melted away as if vaporized, leaving only a dim trace of its existence. Max sank to the ground, trembling with terror and exhaustion. He realized that he had encountered dark forces that he could not understand or overcome. Heading home through the desolate paths of the forest, Max heard rustles and whispers, but a terrible secret now lurked in his heart. He realized that some entity had caught up with him from a world he could barely comprehend. And every morning when he woke up, He now knew that he could not escape this ghostly presence that was now part of his reality. That evening, after a thunderstorm as lightning tore the sky over the city, David sat by the window in his small apartment. He sighed, remembering his late friend Alice. They had been inseparable since childhood, but a tragic car accident had claimed her life only a few months ago. Suddenly, an unidentifiable rustle caught David's attention. He looked at the old radio set forgotten on the shelf. David remembered that Alice loved that radio. It was her diary of sounds and music. David's heart pounded faster as the radio spoke to itself, emitting a hoarse whisper. Frightened, but adept with technology, David began to tune the radio. At first it was just noises and wheezes, but then the sound became clearer. He made out the words, "David, it's me." "Alice, listen to me." David's heart sank. It was her voice. He was afraid to believe it, but he kept listening. Alice began to give him messages he couldn't explain. She described places they had visited together, memories that only they both knew. Every time David tried to ask a question, the radio would make noise and interrupt him. On nights, David sat tuning the radio to listen to Alice. She would warn him about something that was about to happen, events that were about to happen. These predictions were accurate, and David was beginning to get scared. He felt that something was wrong, that Alice was trying to warn him of something scary. One evening, as David was listening to the radio, Alice suddenly stopped. The radio squeaked again and went silent. David was beating hysterically, trying to get back to her voice. But he could no longer hear her whisper. But the next morning brought terrible news. David learned that the building he was now living in was on the verge of collapse, due to recent storm damage. He had managed to evacuate at the last moment when the building collapsed, crushing his apartment. Among the rubble was his old radio, burned and broken. David realized that Alice had warned him of the coming danger. Her ghostly messages had saved his life. Since then, David never heard Alice's voice over the radio again. But he knew she would always be with him, guarding him from the world beyond. This incident was not only tragic for David, but also tantalizing proof of supernatural intervention. The evening when the radio went silent after Alice's voice left him in a state of shock and hopelessness. He thrashed hysterically, trying to return to that moment when the world still seemed connected to the soul of his lost friend. The next morning, when he learned of the possible danger, reinforced by the storm damage to the building, his mind couldn't stop at the alarm. Evacuation was literally an escape from certain doom, and he shuddered at the thought that he was not alone in that moment. There was an ashy sadness among the wreckage intertwined with his lost radio. David gaped in horror, mixed with gratitude, realizing that Alice's messages had warned him of impending collapse. They had been his only salvation in an hour when he might have been without them, since Alice's voice was no longer on the live feed. David felt her presence persist. He knew she would always be with him, guiding him through narrow paths and difficult times. Deep in the historic center of the city stood an old mansion surrounded by tall trees and quiet streets. In this house, steeped in long-standing legends and secrets, lived the White family. Mr. and Mrs. White and their daughter Eliza had moved here just a few months ago to start a new life. 8-year-old Eliza was a dreamy, lonely girl who often played alone in their large garden. One day, as the sun was already setting over the horizon, Eliza noticed a strange girl hiding behind an old maple tree in the garden. The girl was ghostly, with a dim glow around her, but her face was clear and kind. Eliza approached her, feeling no fear, and asked her name. "My name is Anna," the girl replied, smiling. "And what is your name?" "I'm Eliza," the girl replied. "Do you want to play with me?" From that moment Eliza and Anna became inseparable friends. They played together all day long, spent hours under the old maple tree, listened to the noise of the leaves, and laughed until morning. Mrs. White watched her daughter with amazement and joy. For the first time in years Eliza was happy, but as time went on, strange things began to happen in the house. Footsteps were heard in the hallways at night, doors opened when no one was touching them, and unfamiliar writing sometimes appeared on the mirrors. Mr. and Mrs. White began to worry about their daughter's health, but Eliza claimed she was fine and that her friend Anna was protecting her. One night, Mrs. White, hearing noises coming from Eliza's room, went in there to see what was going on. Eliza was standing in the center of the room, eyes fixed on an old mirror on the wall. The mirror reflected the face of a little girl, very much like Eliza, but old-looking, with blazing eyes and a distorted smile. "Eliza, what are you doing?" Mrs. White shrieked, running up to her daughter. Eliza turned to her, her eyes cold and unmoving. "This is my friend Anna. She protects me from evil spirits. She said they shouldn't come near us." Mrs. White fearfully pushed her daughter away from the mirror and covered it with her handkerchief. She realized something was wrong with the house and decided to look into its past. After researching the archives, she learned that 100 years ago, a girl named Anna had lived in this house. She had disappeared without a trace and no one knew what had happened to her. Mrs. White decided to seek the help of a psychic. The psychic confirmed that the house was indeed haunted by the spirit of a girl named Anna, and that she was protecting Eliza from the evil forces that were attracted by the darkness that had possessed the house since her disappearance. They decide to perform a purification ritual to banish the sinister forces. But in the process of the ritual, something went wrong. Eliza, surrounded by glowing figures, suddenly disappeared before everyone's eyes. Mrs. White cried out because the girl was no longer there. No one saw Eliza after that. She was thought to be missing. Mr. and Mrs. White left the house, but they still heard whispers and rustles in the night, reminding them of the soul of the little girl who disappeared 100 years ago. No tenants have stayed in the house for long since. The legend of the missing girl and her encounter with modern-day Eliza began to be told around town, reinforcing the house's mystical reputation. The main character, named Jacob, has always been fascinated by various artifacts and antiques from the past. One day, while going through his grandfather's old things, he came across a dusty box, inside of which he found an old cassette tape with recordings. The voice that came from the speakers belonged to his grandfather, who had long since passed away. On the tape, his grandfather warned of an unseen danger that had been plaguing their family for generations. Jacob hadn't paid much attention to the recordings at first, thinking they were a figment of his grandfather's imagination. However, after several nights of restless sleep and strange dreams, his grandfather's words began to haunt him. "Danger is near, beware of the signs," the voice from the tape said, surrounding Jacob with a mysterious atmosphere. With each playback of the tape, his grandfather's voice became clearer and more real. Jacob began to notice strange shadows in the corners of the room and heard rustling outside the door. He realized that the danger his grandfather had spoken of was much closer than he had imagined. He decided to investigate the origin of the records and find out exactly what could be threatening his family. Diving deeper and deeper into the research, Jacob found references to an ancient ritual connected to his family line. The gruesome mysteries and sacrifices he read about gave him goosebumps. In the entry, his grandfather mentioned that the ritual was not fully completed and the danger could return at any moment. With each increasing play of the tape, Jacob began to see the ghostly figures of past ancestors standing behind him, as if waiting for their moment. Fear gripped him more and more, but he couldn't just drop the tape because he felt that the answer to the danger was there. The main character, named Jacob, has always been fascinated by various artifacts and antiques from the past. One day, while going through his grandfather's old things, he came across a dusty box, inside of which he found an old cassette tape with recordings. The voice that came from the speakers belonged to his grandfather, who had long since passed away. On the tape, his grandfather warned of an unseen danger that had been plaguing their family for generations. Jacob hadn't paid much attention to the recordings at first, thinking they were a figment of his grandfather's imagination. However, after several nights of restless sleep and strange dreams, his grandfather's words began to haunt him. "Danger is near, beware of the signs," the voice from the tape said, surrounding Jacob with a mysterious atmosphere. With each playback of the tape, his grandfather's voice became clearer and more real. Jacob began to notice strange shadows in the corners of the room and heard rustling outside the door. He realized that the danger his grandfather had spoken of was much closer than he had imagined. He decided to investigate the origin of the records and find out exactly what could be threatening his family. Diving deeper and deeper into the research, Jacob found references to an ancient ritual connected to his family line. The gruesome mysteries and sacrifices he read about gave him goosebumps. In the entry, his grandfather mentioned that the ritual was not fully completed and the danger could return at any moment. With each increasing play of the tape, Jacob began to see the ghostly figures of past ancestors standing behind him, as if waiting for their moment. Fear gripped him more and more, but he couldn't just drop the tape because he felt that the answer to the danger was there. But the moment he opened the grave, darkness engulfed him, and he heard his grandfather's whispered warnings of what was in the grave. Horrified by the opening, Jacob realized that the decision he had made to save himself had only exacerbated the danger by awakening an ancient evil. The ground shook, and a figure rose out of the darkness, its monstrous appearance horrifying to the core. Jacob realized that his decision had led to the release of the ancient evil, which now sought bloody revenge for years of imprisonment. As he battled an unseen enemy from the past, Jacob realized that he had become the key to resolving centuries-old grievances and secrets. He realized that only he could end the cycle of suffering that stretched through generations of his family. And in a final act of desperate struggle, in the twilight of the old chapel, Jacob stood before his grandfather, whose soul had been bound to evil 1,000 years ago. Strength and determination filled his heart, and he realized that only love and forgiveness could break the chain of evil that held his family in chains of fear. And the moment steel met ancient evil, light pierced the darkness and his grandfather vanished, leaving only a smile on Jacob's face. In silence, the hostages of past and present met, and a new chapter began for Jacob and his family, freed from the curse that had burdened them for years. In a deep forest, hidden from the eyes of outsiders, stands an abandoned psychiatric hospital, shrouded in a mysterious aura. Its walls, covered with moss and mold, seem to hold dark secrets forgotten by the world. Only rare daredevils dare to enter these gloomy corridors, over which the stifling odor of old age and loss hangs. According to legend, this abandoned place is haunted by the spirits of former patients, whose moans and whispers can be heard at night under the weeping wind. The shadows of the past roam the rooms and corridors, their mute silhouettes causing terror and awe in those who dare to break the dead silence of this place. One day a group of researchers decide to venture into this abandoned psychiatric hospital, hoping to find answers to mysterious questions. Under the cover of night, they crawled through a crumbling fence and entered the open doors of a building full of ancient fear. As soon as they were inside, a feeling of crushing fear and dread engulfed each of them. On the walls hung tattered photographs of former patients, faces distorted with painful masks of madness. Old bloody footprints on the floor were reminders of the tragic events that had taken place here many years ago. As the group moved deeper into the interior, they heard rustlings and ghostly sighs that pierced the heart and soul. Shadows of the past began to materialize before their eyes, urging them to leave the place, fearing for their souls. However, one of the explorers, gripped by curiosity and despair, decided to move on, disregarding the warnings of his companions. Soon his sinister decision was the cause of a series of strange and terrifying events that began to unfold before their eyes. Suddenly the doors closed on their own, isolation and fear enveloped the group, preventing any step closer to the exit. Muttering voices and shrill screams filled the air, bringing with them echoes of unspeakable longing and despondency. The research team was trapped in this eerie maze of the past, where the spirits of former patients lorded over every corner, as if the dead souls would never leave them alone. The shadows became more and more distinct, their ghostly forms so real that it seemed possible to touch a sinister silhouette passing by. Their situation was becoming more hopeless by the minute. They realized that no worldly law could save them from this place of damnation and horror. Panic and despair gripped the hearts of the daring explorers, surrendering them to the power of the unknown and terrifying. It was not until late at night, when the last of them were gripped by a strange and incomprehensible weakness, that they heard the whispering of shadows that urged them to leave the place. With one shuddering thought of freedom from this nightmare, they were able to find their way out of this cursed mental hospital. Falling through the darkness and the abyss of terror, they made their way out, greeting the dawn with a sense of indescribable relief. But the shadow of the place stayed with them, leaving a trace in their souls that will forever remind them of the terrible night in the abandoned mental hospital, where the spirits of former patients roam dark corners and flicker in the gloom. Once upon a time, a peaceful community of people lived in a small town surrounded by forests and mountains. The town was called Svetlograd because the sun's rays shone so brightly on its roofs at sunrise and sunset. However, the peace and tranquility of the place was broken by a mysterious series of disappearances of children. The first rumors of the disappearances spread through the town lightning fast, and the residents became worried. It was strange that all the disappearances happened in their sleep, and in the morning parents would find empty beds. No one heard any screams, no rustling, no stamping of feet. The children seemed to vaporize into thin air, leaving only spread blankets. The Svetlograd police investigated each case, but to no avail. They searched homes, questioned witnesses, and sent the missing toys for examination. But no evidence was found. The residents of the town were terrified and panicked, not knowing what to do or how to protect their children. One day at midnight, one of the residents, old Gregor, claimed to have seen a strange light in the forest, and a shadow resembling a human figure drifting away. Everyone thought his tales were senile delusions, but as the disappearances continued, his words began to sound more and more plausible. One midnight, a group of desperate parents decided to head into the woods in search of answers. They felt a strange magical attraction whose power compelled them forward. Dark trees leaned toward them as if foreshadowing something ominous. As the group progressed, they encountered more and more mysteries and obstacles. They found an ancient temple lost in the middle of a dense forest, where the walls were covered with inscriptions in incomprehensible languages and symbols that emitted a strange glow. Inside the temple they found underground catacombs, where an ancient staircase of the disappeared led. Daring to descend, they found themselves in a vast cavern full of shimmering crystals and waterfalls. But in the distance they could see the outline of a figure, seemingly ghostly and vague. The mysterious figure rose out of the darkness, shrouded in colored smoke, and began to slowly approach the group. The parents felt a strong urge to run, but their legs refused to move. The figure was like a creature from another world, a being filled with sinister magic and power. Suddenly, they saw the figure dissolve into thin air, and many children began to appear around them, including the ones who had disappeared. The children looked at them with smiles as if nothing had happened, but their eyes glowed mysteriously and thoughtfully. It turned out that the children had been in the netherworld all this time, shackled by someone's mysterious spell. The figure that appeared in the cave was a guardian between the worlds who had made a mistake, and the children were held hostage to this gap of reality. The parents cried with happiness when they saw their children alive and whole again. They hugged them and vowed to never let anything separate them again. Under the auspices of strange forces, the children and parents left the cave and returned to Svetlograd, nourished by the knowledge that they were now bound not only by blood, but by a secret bond binding the two worlds together. The city was once again bathed in mystical light, but this time the inhabitants were careful to keep their children safe, knowing that the world is not always as safe as it seems. For a long time now, rumors have been circulating in the forest about a mysterious man who wanders among the trees like a ghost. His footsteps are inaudible and his face is hidden under a dark hood. A lonely traveler, hunched over from the weight of the past, he follows his grim fate silently. Those who have ever met his gaze say that he carries grief and pain, flying on the wings of the black bird of death. But the chief mysticism is that every step this man takes in the forest is felt as approaching death. One day, a young shepherd boy left his home and traveled deep into the forest, hoping to find a lost flock of sheep. With each step he felt an invisible shadow envelope him more tightly, and his heart sank with fear. The wind whispered in the branches of the trees, portending trouble. The shepherd boy realized that he was trapped among the impenetrable foliage, and now every rustle, every breath of the forest seemed to him a harbinger of inevitable doom. Danger was creeping up like an ominous ghost, invisible but palpable. As the sun began to set over the horizon, the shepherd boy heard a low whisper behind him and quickly turned around. But no one was there but the rippling shadows of the trees. Fear gripped him harder, terrifying him with each step leading him deeper into the labyrinth of the forest. The sounds of nature began to distort in his ears, as if an invisible storm was coming. The shepherd boy did not know how to get out of this nightmare, where every step was accompanied by a mysterious feeling of proximity to an imminent end. The forest became an ominous world filled with menace. Through the dense foliage, he saw a figure standing in the middle of a clearing, whose gaze pierced his soul. It was the mysterious hooded man whose footsteps felt like approaching death. The shepherd boy realized that his time had come. But instead of attacking him, the mysterious man slowly approached the shepherd boy and quietly spoke words of mystery and wisdom. He said that death was only the beginning of a new journey, that fear was inevitable, but that one could embrace it and transform it into strength. The shepherd boy experienced a strange calmness, as if he realized that death is not scary if one accepts it as part of life. The mysterious man disappeared, as if he vanished into thin air. But his words remained with the shepherd boy, filling his heart with unknown wisdom. So the shepherd boy learned to look at every step in the forest not as impending death, but as an opportunity to embrace life in all its manifestations. He left the forest, filling his heart with the light of understanding that fear can be overcome by accepting it humbly. Since then, rumors have been circulating in the forest about the shepherd boy who overcame his fear of death and found the true meaning of life. And the mysterious hooded man continues to wander among the trees, reminding everyone that every step can be both an approach to death and a new beginning. Deep in the night, when the shadows grow thicker and silence envelopes the world, strange dreams began to appear in a house on the outskirts of a small town. People saw nightmarish images, felt invisible eyes on them, and heard whispers that seemed to penetrate their souls. Intertwined in an indecipherable mosaic, the dreams led them to the same place, an abandoned cemetery outside the city. There, among the tombstones and darkness, lurked the demon eater of dreams, a creature from ancient legends who drained the souls of his victims by devouring their dreams. Every night, he penetrated their dreams, ripping out the most terrible and darkest moments, leaving behind only emptiness and fear. Those who saw him described his appearance as a distorted monster with blazing eyes and fangs ready to tear their dreams apart. Traces of his presence began to appear in the real world as well, mysterious drawings on the walls, strange sounds in the night, disappearing objects. The people of the town were terrified. They knew that every night could be the last, that the Dream Eater demon could choose them as the next victim. Panic gripped the town, and people began to avoid sleep, afraid of falling into a nightmare world and losing themselves. But the more they tried to hold on to reality, the more the demon threatened their minds, gradually invading their waking world. One day, one of the brave residents, determined to stop the nightmare, traveled to an abandoned cemetery. Old sword in hand, he penetrated the darkness, feeling the growing fear and terror that drove him forward. An eerie screech rang out among the tombstones, and the Dream Eater demon appeared before him in all its ghastly glory. The sword glinted in the hand of the brave inhabitant, and they engaged in a battle where reality and dream were intertwined into one. The battle went on for a long time, and the sounds of terrible battle cries awakened the town. The inhabitants looked anxiously toward the cemetery, not knowing who would win in this ancient confrontation. But then suddenly everything came to a standstill. Silence fell over the town, and only the whistling of the wind broke the peace of the night. Since that night, dreams became peaceful, and the demon eater of dreams disappeared without a trace, leaving only the memory of his nightmares. In a forgotten underground labyrinth, hidden from the world's view, darkness and silence reign. The cold walls wriggle like living creatures, and the echoes of footsteps rumble, remaining forever in the air. Only a few brave men dare to explore these hidden corridors, but not all of them return. Those who have gone into the shadows become the living dead, the ghosts of the abyss, whose moans can be heard throughout the labyrinth. They wander among the bowels, their distorted faces contorted with menace and their creaking snores a reminder of sleepless nightmares. Bloodlust and fear hover through the corridors, filling the space with terror. Some say the labyrinth tries to hold its victims, drawing them into its secrets and curses. But others say it only serves those who dare to disturb its peace, sending them to meet the living dead to become part of this cursed place. Dark shadows float along the walls, the curves of the labyrinth changing, confusing travelers and mesmerizing their minds. Each step leads to a new danger, each turn prevents return. The living dead watch from the shadows, their shadowy hands reaching out to those who have strayed, their voices whispering threats and curses. But there are those who don't believe in any of this. They believe the labyrinth to be nothing more than a myth, invented to frighten the faint-hearted. But those who have spent long hours here know the truth. The underground labyrinth has a life of its own. It feeds on the fear and tears of those who dare to enter its embrace. Night after night, days flow into infinity, and the living dead continue to wander, twisted and sinister. Whether they seek salvation or only new victims, no one knows. Only those who have become part of the labyrinth themselves can sense its true nature, its endless desire to consume one's soul and forever enclose it in its embrace. The underground labyrinth does not forgive mistakes and will not forget its prey. Its walls radiate malice, each stone slab imposes its own nightmare. Those caught in its claws will know true horror, the fading light, the sounds of pain and despair, the shadow that consumes everything. And so, everyone who has ever been able to see its stone walls becomes a prisoner in this eternal darkness. The labyrinth devours the souls of the brave, leaving no chance for salvation. The living dead continue to wander, their screams becoming the main song of the hellish landscape. Those who survived and managed to return tell of their losses and nightmares, of ominous visions and cold touches. But even after returning to the surface, they cannot escape the shadow of the labyrinth, its curse that stays with them forever. The underground labyrinth is eternal darkness, the living dead its own living curse. In the depths of the mist swamp lurk ancient secrets lost with the ashes of time. Dense clouds of fog conceal the gloomy silhouettes of trees, curved like the fires of victims. As the traveler walked through the ominous branches, he felt the cold fingers of the swampy darkness trying to grip his soul. Strange sounds echoed through the silence, the rustling of night creatures and the whispers of ancient demons. Those who dared to venture deeper told of otherworldly beings waiting for those who lost their way. Legends of souls caught in the net of the ages shrieked in the darkness, tormented and doomed to wander forever. Mysterious lights beckoned to aimlessly wandering wanderers, leading them to the abyss of oblivion. In the merciless swamp, every step was a challenge, every trail a threat. By day the darkness chained you to the swamp clay, and by night the shadows took on a life of their own, coiling around your consciousness, darkening and making you question your own senses. The world of the swamp was saturated with malice and fear, a trap for the weak-willed and inquisitive. Thirst for knowledge often led to ruin, and curiosity led to punishment. The past that caught up with its prey was inevitably swept away by the shadows of the swamp's turmoil, consuming memories and leaving only traces of terror and anxiety. Even the animals that inhabited his dry land were awe-inspiring. Their eyes glittered in the darkness like demons, and their slurred cries pierced the night sky. The swamp seemed to hunger for destruction, feeding on fear and anxiety like a hungry beast hungry for fresh souls. Those who attempted to master the secrets of the swamp often doomed themselves to damnation. Madness and darkness became their faithful companions, and the connection with reality disappeared, dissolving them in a bottomless abyss of horror. Legends tell of terrible rituals performed in remote corners of the misty swamp, where the souls of the unfortunate found their final resting place in the embrace of the abyss. And there, in the deepest gorge, where the darkest and most ghastly secrets originated, the demons resided, whispering powerlessly through quicksilver shadows. Their power was absolute and their voice filled every corner of the swamp, filling the space and consuming the brave and the foolish. The travelers disappeared without a trace, as if swallowed by the darkness, their cries fading into the abyss, taking with them the last chance of escape. The misty swamp was a place of darkness and despair, where every rustle, every flicker of a candle could be the last. The spirits of the dead wept through the cold winds, reminding the living of their powerless suffering. And those who dared to plunge into its depths were inevitably deprived of the last tiny remnant of reason. Swallowed up by the endless darkness, leaving only the echo of their terrifying disappearance. The apartment building on the corner of Elm Street had long since been covered with a drooping overhanging roof and peeling paint. All its windows were covered with dust and irresistible mirror reflections. Residents of neighboring houses avoided passing it at night, believing it to be a fortress of sinister forces. One day the Simmons family, a young couple with 2 children, moved in. They did not believe the rumors about the house and saw it only as an opportunity to buy a home at a lower price. From their first days in the house, the family began to notice strange reflections in the mirrors. They reflected distorted images of themselves, as if in parallel worlds. At night they heard rustling and knocking from the rooms where the mirrors stood. Little Johnny claimed that he saw his double in the mirror, who smiled at him sinisterly. His parents wrote it off as a child's imagination until they themselves encountered the amazing thing. One day the mother, looking in the mirror in the bedroom, saw herself. Only the words from the dark parallel world sounded, "You are here forever." Her breath caught, and she turned around to reassure herself that everything was all right. But the room was dark, and she felt the breath of cold on her neck. Fear gripped her and she ran out of the bedroom, screaming in terror. Her husband heard the screams and ran out to her, but in the mirror of his reflection he saw himself smearing a trail of blood across the floor. The Simmons family decided to leave the house, but found that all exits were blocked, as if the walls had closed in around them. They wandered around the house trying to find a way out, but each time they found themselves in the same room, with mirrors that reflected dark parallel worlds. In the kitchen mirror, they would see them sitting there trying to find a way out, and then walk away, leaving only emptiness. The Simmons family's days became a nightmare in which they could find no way out. They experienced a fear that was incomparable to anything else. In the mirrors, they saw not only their reflections, but dark shadows following them, eager to devour their souls. They began to hallucinate, seeing only the reflections of their deaths before them. The Simmons family remained in the house on the corner of Elm Street forever. Their names became blanks on the list of tenants, their friends forgot about them, and the residents of the neighboring houses chose to keep silent about this gloomy place. The house became derelict, but it seemed to all who walked by that the whispering of the Ashokas, imprisoning souls in their reflections, came from the windows. Since then, the apartment building on the corner of Elm Street has become a place where reality and nightmares mingle, where mirrors reflect dark parallel worlds, where souls are captivated and lost, wandering through endless corridors. Whoever dares to look into the mirror of this house risks seeing not only himself, but also his dark side, captivated in this dark dimension where there is no escape and only darkness. In a small provincial town, a strange legend of a ghostly phone call from the past appeared. It was said that this call came at night, reminding of some terrible event that was about to happen. Stories of the call were passed from mouth to mouth, and anyone who heard it felt an unknown threat upon them. According to legend, the bell begins with a quiet, almost indistinguishable buzzing that gradually builds to a shrill hum that pierces the night's peace. Whoever was able to wait for the call to end claimed that something terrible, inexplicable, and inescapable awaited him during the next 24 hours. A lonely old house standing on the outskirts of town served as the epitome of this legend. The inhabitants assured that it was from there that the mysterious call was coming. Many of the gawkers who gathered at the old building in the evening claimed to have heard its hum, and soon became the objects of mystical events themselves. One day, a young girl named Alice decided to investigate this legend in more detail. Gathering all her courage, she went outside at the darkest hour of the night and headed towards the ominous house. Passing through the braided garden, she reached the entryway with the cracked door and became nervous. Suddenly a shrill beeping sound cut through the silence, making Alice shudder with terror. The old door creaked open, opening on its own as if to let her inside, where darkness swallowed the light of her flashlight. The girl's heart pounded frantically and her footsteps echoed through the empty hallways as if someone or something was following her. Alice reached the room where the old telephone stood, covered in dust and cobwebs. She waited, frozen in place, waiting for the mysterious call. And then, suddenly, a quiet, ominous buzzing began, growing louder and more piercing with each passing second. The buzzing sounded with terrific force, gnawing into the girl's consciousness, forcing her to cover her ears in pain. Paralyzed by fear, Alice could not take her eyes off the phone, as if sensing that this call would bring something incredible and terrible. In the darkness, a sharp glow blinded her eyes, and she saw a figure emerge from the darkness. The terrible vision looked at the girl through a black veil, emitting a cold chill, as if it had come from the world of the dead. A voice descending from the nothingness whispered a warning to her, of impending trouble, an imminent threat that could not be avoided. Alice realized that this call was only a harbinger of something worse to come. By sheer force of will, she turned away from the otherworldly creature and ran out of the house, trembling with fear, carrying in her chest a sense of impending misfortune. Her breath was caught in the cold air that seemed to flow from the gates of hell, heralding the approach of evil. With every step Alice resolutely steered toward the light, but fear of the coming threat was ingrained in her heart. The next morning, she read in the newspaper about a tragic accident at the old House A fire that had claimed the lives of everyone inside. At the same time, her phone rang, and at the other end of the line there was a familiar ominous beep, reminding her of the trouble ahead. Alice sensed that the mysterious call from the past was an imminent threat that could not be stopped. In the night, when the moon was hidden behind the clouds and the shadows had become overbearing lords over the dark corners of the netherworld, the stocky fingers of countless creatures protruding from the dark gorges reached for the portal where ominous events awaited. For centuries, the netherworld had been sealed in darkness and malice, imbued with fear and an atmosphere of betrayal. It was haunted by evil and cursed souls, hungry for power over the world of the living. On the stone walls of the ancient ruins hung faded scrolls with curses, and beneath the ground lurked terrifying creatures whose moans and cries resounded in the empty corridors as if an orchestra was conducting its sinister symphonies. Dark magic permeated every stone, every breath in the netherworld, and the souls of those consumed by evil became servants of the rulers of darkness, guarding the portal and longing for release. Legend had it that only those who passed through the portal could gain power over countless worlds, but the price for this power was high, the sacrifice of their own souls and the final plunge into darkness. One day in ancient times, a brave warrior dared to overcome the darkness of the netherworld and open the portal, but his fears and doubts turned into the wands of malevolent beings intent on preventing him from achieving his goal. As he approached the portal, the sinister beings became more and more aggressive, seeking to keep him at the mercy of darkness and despair. But the warrior was persistent and determined, and nothing could stop him, not even the army of demons that burst from the portal cavity. The battle was fierce and bloody, the ground shook under the blows of swords and spells, and the air was filled with the screams and shrieks of the sinister creatures that clotted together in one last desperate dash to stop the warrior in his mission. But with each step the warrior took, he felt his strength and determination grow, as if the other world itself recognized his right to become its lord. Finally, the warrior reached the main arch of the portal, exhausted but not broken. The clouds of darkness parted, and before him stood a mysterious space filled with powerful energy and the promise of uncharted forces. With his last breath, the warrior stepped through the portal, and the world around him distorted, consuming his essence and will. The darkness swallowed him, but in what was beyond the portal, eternal might and cruel secrets became his lot, forever keeping him inside the netherworld. From then on, the netherworld was guarded by a new master whose power was inherent and terrifying, and only those who dared to reopen the portal could hope that one day they could free the captured entity and return to the light of the living.